and welcome to the Women's Marketing Club. I'm Laura Blacklaws and I am co-founder of this really unique and exciting concept that we have launched in the UK. Now today I am talking to Jo Hodson, and Jo will admit herself that she works with square pegs who are trying to force themselves into round holes. Her passion was born from a journey of plant-based nutrition being the gateway to stepping away from the convention and conformity into a deeper connection of her true sense of self. When she's not busy whipping up delicious dishes in the kitchen, you can find her sharing some fantastic recipes and words of wisdom at includingcake.com. Now, Jo shares a common interest with us at the Women's Marketing Club, as she has a desire to empower others in exploring their own path to optimum nutrition. So, Jo, can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to do what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. This journey began about 2011, really. That was when I shifted to a plant-based diet, and that was through a previous relationship. And it wasn't something I'd ever thought about at all. It was more of an accidental shift at the time, but it was when I realised how much better I felt, how much more energy I had, how much more space in my head I had, and my sort of the way I almost began to see life and the world shifted. It just became about so much more than what was on my plate. So that was when really, I had to take that leap. I was working in an architectural practice. I was in that corporate world, and it wasn't my calling in life. And it got to the point where I had to sort of admit to myself, there's more to life than this. And I think the nutritional shifts that had come in the months before had a lot to do with that. So I realised I was kind of plodding through life, sort of in neutral, really, and I had to do something about it. So that was very much the catalyst for shifting into what I'm doing now.
No, it's really interesting, and I think it's something that a lot of our listeners will be able to resonate with, that sometimes we do just plod through life, and it's simple things like maybe taking up a Pilates class or going to the gym, or like you say, just kind of changing your diet.
It's subtle. It's sometimes small, subtle things, and it's where they then lead you. It's not about launching at the deep end necessarily. I mean, sometimes that can be the answer, but it's one small shift, which then kind of almost it shifts your perspective, maybe mere millimeters, but that means you get an entirely different view of the world. So it's a fascinating journey once you take that step into it.
Sure thing. And I guess as well, you start you join other groups, and you look into other influencers for experience and ideas. And I guess that's when all of a sudden the kind of light bulb moment happens.
Exactly. You do change your environment. You change the sort of the people you're around, and the books you read, and the groups you're part of, and the sort of input, the information you're taking in changes, and that then sort of changes you sort of on a deeper level, sometimes subconsciously, probably often subconsciously.
Yeah. So do you find that you have kind of created your own tribe over the last couple of years? Are you really kind of attracting the kind of people who can relate to your experience and your story?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, actually, because I think I am now probably more so than it's interesting, because for a long time I struggled with clarity. I'm a kind of a full-on creative, so I have a lot of fingers and a lot of pies, and that often overwhelms me. So with this love of doing all these different things, sometimes my message is not that clear, and particularly in the early years, it wasn't necessarily that clear. And some of the people I was attracting, I was kind of like, but why are these people coming to me? I don't want to do this work. And I realized it was the clarity, my message wasn't kind of on point. So yes, I am, but it's taken a while to realize how to do it and how to tap into my message in order to attract the right people. That's been an interesting journey in itself.
And that's a great message, actually, for our listeners, because I think before you take the leap to setting up your own business, you think that you have to be perfect, you have to know it all, and you basically have to look like you've got your shit together. When actually 9 times out of 10, you just kind of know that you've got to do something and just wander through it, but you learn along the way.
And I'd say also, just the thoughts come up to me as you were talking, one of the things that I hear a lot kind of bounced around is this idea of you have to know your niche. And yes, I think to some extent that's useful, and sometimes it's maybe really obvious for people, but I know for me, trying to figure out who I worked with and what I did almost before getting into it. So as a coach, I qualified as a health coach, and I was like, right, I'm going to coach people around food. And I kind of really tried to niche myself down to sort of vegan food, sugar-free, all this stuff. And I realized actually it was more the mindset around food and this creative way of interacting with life. And food was sort of a gateway into it. It wasn't almost the thing in and of itself in some ways. And I was trying to like press myself into this niche before I really had a sense of who I was and how I worked. And I think actually for a lot of people, this idea of your niche and what it is who it is you serve kind of evolves over time. So you have to allow that fluidity, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that's like a really perfect word, actually, being fluid. Just kind of being yourself and knowing that you've got this and you've got people around you who will support you and guide you in the right direction.
Yeah. And also having people around you that will call you out on your shit as well. Like, if I know, I tend to self-sabotage a lot. I get stuck in my head, and I have people around me who will call me out on that. I think you don't just want to have people who'll say, wow, yeah, good job, that was really good. And friends and family will want to keep you safe, and they'll say what they think you want to hear. But actually having people who will call you out, sometimes the stuff you don't want to hear is really important.
That is so true. And I think that's what we want to do at the Women's Marketing Club. We want to show all of our listeners and our followers that it's okay not to be okay. And it's actually more important to talk about the hardships and the challenges than it is when you're being successful and you win the whole time.
What's important is to show up. Is just to show up. It's whether you're having a great day, a crap day, it's show up. And it's I don't necessarily mean sort of in public, but to the people that matter to you, to the groups, to the show up however it is you're feeling, rather than hiding away and playing it small, because nothing big comes from that small space. So showing up, I think, is the most powerful thing we can do wherever we're at, whatever's going on in our heads.
Definitely. And it sounds like you're kind of talking from experience there. So that does lead me on to the next question of, have you faced many challenges since you've been set up on your own? And if you have, how have you overcome them?
I think the thing I've struggled with most is self-sabotage, and a lot of that's come from lack of structure. When you work for somebody else or with a team, or you have a structure in your work day. You go to work at a certain time, you have a lunch break at a certain time, you have people to answer to, there's people waiting on you for certain results. Suddenly, when all of that is stripped away and you've just got yourself to answer to, it's massively overwhelming at times. It in a way, it's the best thing and the worst thing. You can create life on your own terms, but when you've got this blank canvas, it's like, where do you start? So that was, and still is, probably my biggest stumbling block, because with a kind of creative head, I tend to go off in all sorts of tangents, and I can just get carried away, totally down the wrong stream of thought. So the way I'm overcoming, rather than having overcome, overcoming it, and it's an ongoing process, is working with coaches. I am a coach. I have my own coach. I have people around me that I know will call me out on stuff. I'm not in a mastermind group specifically, but those sorts of things. It's not, you don't have to necessarily pay out tons of money to have a coach, but it's having those people in your corner, being able to sort of developing yourself enough to sort of be able to catch yourself. I'm better now at catching myself in the moment when I'm kind of going off on a bit of a tangent or having a moment or whatever. And it's about recentering yourself quicker and picking up and carrying on quicker.
And it's all learning, isn't it? And that's one of the things that I've learned in my own business, is actually having time is one of the most precious things, because you realize maybe where you're going wrong or what you're saying to yourself that's then affecting how you run your business.
It's also, I think, boundary setting, because when you run your own business, and for a lot of people, you're running it from the comfort of our own home, which is great, but equally we haven't got that threshold of going out to work, coming home from work. We're just kind of constantly kind of working a little bit all the time, which is really doesn't serve us. And I still struggle with that. I sort of always feel like I should be doing something else, or I'm making dinner and I'll quickly take a photo of Instagram, and it's having that awareness around ourselves of where should we create boundaries.
And I guess with your business as well, I suppose, like, social media has really exploded, so I imagine you do kind of always have this thought in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I do. And I think probably the majority of it, those who don't do a lot on social media probably think, oh, I should be doing more. Those who are on it a lot feel as though they're being swamped by it. You know, I think it's something probably the majority of us battle with to some degree, you know, how to best make it work for us without, you know, giving a life over to it.
Absolutely. And is there one thing that you'd say has helped you grow your business or attract more clients, or is that something that you're still figuring out?
I would say it's showing up vulnerably. And kind of what I mean by that is I mean, I mentioned earlier about showing up, but I the way I've sort of tried to do that more and more is do that sort of public, you know, like on Facebook. I'll say where I'm at, you know, if I'm having a bit of a struggly day, I'll say in the moment of it rather than reflecting back. You know, you see a lot of posts on in Facebook and things that, you know, I used to be like this, I used to be like you, I struggled, and it's retrospectively, you know, I don't really see that as true vulnerability when someone's saying, this is how I used to struggle, but look where I am now. I've tried to take steps to be in the struggle and be present to it and be kind of sharing that. I do it on my email newsletter as well. You know, when there's something I'm sort of processing in my head, sometimes I just share where I'm at with that. It might be unresolved, but I feel as though there's a lot of value to be had in that vulnerability, particularly when you're taking ownership. You know, there's a big difference between being the victim, being the owner. And I think if you're taking ownership of a feeling or an emotion or a situation, you can still share quite openly and vulnerably. And it's very different to being kind of, oh, poor me. I've really enjoyed sort of exploring that side of myself and how that then relates to how I've expressed myself in my business.
And that's so empowering, isn't it? Just kind of being you.
But yeah, basically, yeah. In a way, all that kind of waffle with just basically being me. Yeah.
But it's what you've learned, and it's only through, you know, your own way of doing things.
Exactly, it's just your own journey, and you know, the more you can. And I think also it's that thing of when you kind of show up in that space, you invite other people, you give them permission to step into it as well. And you mentioned about being empowering, and that's what it is. You know, when you are in that space, it's like you hold out a hand to say, look, you know, you come and join me. It's like, you know, it's okay. This is just how he is, and I'm cool with it, and I'm just rolling with these emotions, and that's fine. You know, there's a beauty in it. I think that permission giving element.
Absolutely, for sure. So you've given some really fantastic advice there to the ladies listening to the podcast today. Is there a specific piece of advice that you received that you'd like to share, or maybe something that you haven't been told and you wish you had?
I think it's just around, you know, people that have sort of coaches, mentors, people that I've looked up to typically are those that are willing to show up vulnerably, authentically. And it's probably not advice, but it's being that. And it's I think it's also getting out of doing and being and more into being. You know, it's getting out of your head and being in your body, being in your heart. And, you know, that difference between kind of doing and being is something you have to feel.
Yeah.
And you know, whilst it's not a quote, you know, that's probably one of the biggest things I've learned on my journey is just to allow myself to be a lot more rather than do all the time.
Sure. And it's that connection, isn't it, actually, between the mind and the body?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, you've mentioned previously that you've worked with coaches to help to get you where you are today. Is there a particular book or a seminar that you've read or been to, or somebody who really influences your journey?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking at this, reflecting on this question before this call. There's sort of three people / books that I sort of noted in my mind, and I love the work by Brené Brown. I mean, you know, she talks about vulnerability, and she's got a wonderful TED talk. So yeah, Brené Brown TED talk. If anyone, I think it's like one of the top 3, so it's definitely worth a watch. Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert is beautiful in terms of tapping into this space of creativity. That's a lovely book. And as a coach, there's a wonderful book called The Prosperous Coach, which was a game changer for me in terms of how I wanted to show up as a coach. So that's less about sort of, well, it's personal development, but it's development as a coach. So that's more of a kind of a, you know, coaching book. But the other 2 are very much about, you know, getting to know yourself. So there would be sort of the things that come into my mind.
Fantastic. Now, I'm sure our listeners will be writing those down and making notes and kind of ordering them on Amazon too. Now, if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, whether it's to have a look at your delicious recipes that you're creating, or even just to kind of get in touch with you to share your journey, best way of doing so?
Well, my website, as you mentioned at the beginning, is includingcake.com. That has all sorts of sort of brain dumps, so coaching kind of thoughts. That has tons of recipes. It's also got various ways of contacting me. And in terms of social media, my favourite platform is Instagram, and it's just my name, so it's at Jo Hodson. And that's very visual. I'm a visual person, so anyone who's visual, hang out with me on there.
Fantastic. And is there a particular recipe that you'd pinpoint to everybody that's super quick, easy, tasty?
One of my, I think in my archives it's called Crazy Courgette Cake, and basically it's like a chocolate brownie cake that's full of like courgette, and you can put all sorts of veg in it. But I love putting veg in cake because you can't tell it's there, and it's amazingly tasty and healthy. So yeah, my Crazy Courgette Cake. I think there's another one that's very similar that's called chocolate banana brownie bread. Similar recipe base, but yeah, either of those, basically anything with chocolate.
Absolutely, I know, it's like healthy cake. Hello, does it?
Yeah, healthy cake. That's where the name of the blog came from in the beginning. Including Cake came from this desire that I didn't want to give up all these treats, yet I knew I wanted to move in a healthier direction, so I figured I'd have to find a way to do it. And so that was that first step into that space of living life on my own terms.
Fantastic, love it. Jo, you've been hugely inspiring, and I'm sure our listeners will be heading over to includingcake.com right now, as I am going to. So thank you once again for your time, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you, it's been great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jo.